The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon, and
Nancy.
You're Nancy. How about that? It's that works out that way. We've got a big show, and we're very excited because first up we're gonna welcome Leah Hirshcfeld, who she's a semi-regular now on the show, talking about research and explaining research, so Nancy and I can get it, and hopefully that you guys can get it too. I think you guys get it more than we do, but okay. And then we've got some news stories for you, and we just have happy news today, which I'm really glad about. And then we've got an amazing autism mom that we've had on the show before, Kimberly Kaplan, and she is the co-author of this new book that's just out in the last couple of weeks, Remembering Monty. It's about Monty Hall, and I know people are like, what does Monty Hall have to do with autism? Well, it's co-written by an autism mom. Right. That's what it has to do with it. And sometimes everything isn't just about autism. And sometimes it's summer.
Yeah.
We need to be talking about summer reads and supporting autism moms and fun things. And if you are at all somebody who's interested in the Hollywood television game show scene in the 50s, which oddly I am very interested in that, then this is a great summer read. So that's what's happening, and we are not even going to take a break because we've got Leah Hirshcfeld. She's joining us right now via Skype, and so yes, but sometimes we have people in Skype on the phone. At the moment, we just have her at Skype. Let's see if Skype is our friend today. So Leah, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be called a semi-regular.
You are. You're a semi, and be careful because we're going to just start calling you a regular. And so, Leah, talk a little bit about what your role is at CARD and what you join us every so often to talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the privilege to be a research assistant. So I work with probably 10 to 15 members of the CARD team, and we conduct research. We kind of also try our best to summarize research and kind of get an idea of what's out there, so that our clinicians have a really good idea of the most recent research, and that can inform their practices. And so what I, again, very lucky get to do and talk to Shannon and Nancy and everyone who watches Autism Live, I come in and I try to talk about a recently published paper in the last year or so, or maybe a recent conference that just went on, and kind of highlight something that's interesting or potentially answer some questions. Some from parents that I might have seen at a clinic had this type of question, so maybe it's a broader question, and try to demystify the research, because research can be really steeped in statistics and jargon and not so attainable. So that's what I try to do my best at.
And she does it so well. We're so excited to have her here. So we understand that today you're going to talk with us a little bit about bilingualism, which is really cool because we know so many families that is the deal, where more than one language is spoken at home, and there's always this debate about, do we only focus on one? And what lessons do we do ABA in, and big debate about that. So educate us, Leah.
Man, Shannon, you stole my intro, but yeah.
No.
Exactly. No, it's okay. I'm still going to repeat myself anyway. So first, I want to talk about bilingualism and neurotypical kids. So bilingualism and neurotypical kids, there's a lot of research being done on it. It's a very sexy topic, is what we like to call research topics that get a lot of attention. And so what they've seen with bilingual neurotypical kids is that there's a lot of benefits to it. And specifically, the benefits are with skills that are usually about perspective taking. So these are kind of executive functioning skills and theory of mind skills, and they're specifically skills that we see a lot of deficit in with children with ASD. And the really cool thing with bilingual neurotypical kids is that you don't even have to necessarily be a child who speaks 2 languages. You just have to be a child who actually has exposure to the second language. So what that means is that your parents at home might speak Russian, but you yourself don't speak it. You might have a few phrases, or you might be able to kind of understand it, but you would by no means call yourself fluent or even conversational. But you hear it 60% of the time or something. That's exposure. So that's going to be bilingually exposed kids. And for neurotypical kids, we've seen that there's a lot of benefits for bilingual exposure kids. So just exposing your child to that second language is really helpful. Again, this is with neurotypical kids. But it's interesting with the exposure because as a lot of our children with ASD struggle with just having one language accomplished. So having a second language might be really difficult, but even exposing them might be interesting. So again, that's kind of the background on what we see with neurotypical. Now, there's a lot of limited research looking at bilinguals who have a diagnosis of ASD. Again, that kind of makes sense. Like I mentioned, we're trying to make sure that individuals have one solid language. We're not trying to push it to 2. And it's hard enough to get research with children with ASD, and then trying to find ones who also have a second language mastered. That's a lot, right? However, like Shannon said, there's a lot of questions of families that have 2 languages spoken in their home, right? So you might speak Spanish, and you might speak Spanish to another child. You might speak Spanish to all of your family members. You might speak Spanish in church. And then you have a child with this diagnosis, and you don't want to confuse them, right? You don't want to give them Spanish in the home and English at school and have them, God forbid, have no language abilities or get super confused and delayed or whatever it might be. So what do? Because you don't want to cut them off from their culture, from their language, from their family. You also don't want to confuse them. So a study in 2012 looked at both monolinguals and bilinguals who were diagnosed with ASD, and they saw no statistically significant difference. So at the very least, this one study indicates that there's no harm to give your child both those inputs. And it's one study done a few years ago, so take it with a grain of salt. But at least that should kind of answer some questions in that realm. But recently, early last year, there was a study done by Lim and Charla. And what they did was they wanted to look at the effect of English sessions and heritage language sessions. So the heritage language is going to be the language spoken at home. And they wanted to see the effect of that on play for bilingually exposed children with ASD. So again, those bilingually exposed children don't necessarily speak the second language, but they are exposed to it frequently at home, at church, at school, whatever it might be, right? And what Lim and Charla noted that was really exciting, not exciting, but interesting to me, is that in a 2014 or 2015 study, they realized that over 80% of studies done with participants who were diagnosed with ASD were monolingual Caucasians. And that is not representative of the population that is diagnosed with ASD, right? Because you got bilinguals, you got different ethnicities. So we need to be doing research on populations that are reflective of populations that we're trying to do clinical studies with, clinical work with. So with this study, they took 4 participants. I have to go a little bit higher. The 4 participants spoke different languages. So they had one participant who spoke Korean, one who spoke Spanish, one who spoke Chinese. And they took therapists who were fluent in the heritage language and in English. And then they conducted play sessions. So these were sessions where the therapist and the child played together for 5 minutes, and the therapist either spoke in English or spoke in the heritage language. What they saw was that there were increased play interactions. So those are going to be the actual interactions between the therapist and the kiddo. They saw increased play interactions when the therapist spoke in the heritage language. So when the therapist was using that heritage language. Additionally, for those 4 participants, there was one participant that consistently showed challenging behaviors. So they tracked the challenging behaviors over these interventions while they were doing either English or heritage language play sessions. And they saw a decrease in challenging behaviors when they were doing the play session in the heritage language. So again, this heritage language across the 4 participants or the 1 participant saw an increase in play interactions and a decrease in challenging behaviors. The authors suggested a few possibilities for why this might be. And one that I particularly like was that the heritage language, so using the Korean, the Spanish, the Chinese, the kiddo, is naturally rewarding to the child because they hear it at home and they associate it with the warmth and the comfort of their family and their home. I got on board with that. I was like, that seems reasonable. And we've talked about this before, but you always want to make sure you're going to the end of the study and looking at limitations. So every single research study, and if it doesn't, you should be super skeptical of the research study. But every single researcher goes through their research with a fine-tuned comb and looks at all of their limitations so you don't have to. And they'll put it in the end, at the very last page before the work's cited. Somewhere in the discussion, they might have it by themselves that says limitations, and they'll have it kind of embedded in there. And so these researchers had another alternative reason for why they saw these increases in play interactions. Their alternative argument is that it might be because the heritage language was a novel language, right? It was the first time that those kids were hearing the heritage language at the clinic. So it might be because it was novel and new and exciting. It's hard to tell. Some other limitations is that there were only 4 participants. 4 participants is pretty good, but it's not 50. It's way better than 1, but it's not 50. And you'll see research studies with 1 participant, and these are called case studies. And these are done with 1 participant. They're usually done at the beginning of the research of whatever subject it's whatever topic it is. And they're super useful. They really help us like illuminate what might be something everyone's asked but hasn't done the research on, but it is only 1 participant. Not the case with this one, it is 4, but it still means it's only 4 people, right? So if you took 4 people in a room, those 4 people aren't going to be descriptive of the rest of the world. So it is still 4. There's still, again, this is the very beginning of bilingual research with children with ASD. But it's exciting because it means that potentially exposing your child to the second language is not harmful to the child, which is great because that means you don't have to cut them off from their family, from their friends, from their culture, whatever it might be. And there might even be benefits, and you might even be able to use it as a tool to decrease behaviors, to increase learning. And it's a tool that you already potentially have, right? As a family that speaks a second language, it's a tool you already have with your other child, with your partner, whatever it might be. And it might be something you can bring up to the clinical team that, hey, we speak fluent Spanish in the home. We'd love to be able to do some sessions in Spanish if you have a fluent therapist, if not fine. But if you do, and they have some availability, that would be great. And also take data on it. It might be that for your child, this doesn't have any effect, but it might be that having that heritage language is super helpful, really helps them learn, really makes them feel more comfortable, whatever it might be. So again, that's something that hopefully answers that question. I've had a lot of parents who've thought about it and who have not been able to kind of find a good answer about it because it's really new research. But again, I'm just a researcher, so I'm not a clinician, so please talk to your clinician before you implement anything. But something that you can bring up, and it doesn't seem to be harmful at the very least.
Well, that's great news.
It's great. It is, and it's so interesting, and I'm so glad that somebody finally addressed the fact that most of the research was being done with Caucasian kids, because that is not, as you said, indicative of the world, and the research should match the population that is in need, right, of this research. So, Leah, as always, you have expanded our minds, and I understand you're going to be back with us in a couple of weeks. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am in 2 weeks. So if there's anything any viewers want more answers to or research on, throw it in the comments. I can potentially focus on it. Otherwise, I pick things that I find interesting, and hopefully the rest of the community does. But open to suggestions. So if there's anything anyone wants to hear, has a question about, and would like more researching on, I'm not a clinician, but as a researcher, please let me know.
All right,
Okay,
we love it.
Leah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you guys so much for having me on again. I love it.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Just sort of fascinating.
Yeah.
So
We're going to take a quick break
Yep.
before we go to some in the news.
we're going to come back with some in the news, all positive this week. And then a little bit later, Kimberly Kaplan's going to be here to talk about her new book, co-authored book, Remembering Monty, about Monty Hall. Stick with us.
Do you provide care services to someone with autism? Recently, more and more children are being diagnosed with the condition and getting the support they need as awareness grows. But what happens to these children as they grow up? It's estimated that over 500,000 youth with autism will turn 18 in the next decade, and they'll be faced with a very difficult reality. As children with autism grow up, their services start to disappear or become very difficult to access. Things like medical care, mental health counseling, vocational training, and more. All services that are still desperately needed. The loss of support that youth with autism face as they grow up is so severe that it's referred to in the autism community as falling off a cliff. Adults with autism need the same level of support they had as children to avoid falling off the services cliff. Introducing Skills Living, the web-based software designed specifically to help transitioning youth and adults with autism so they can avoid the cliff and instead fly to success. With Skills Living, help your learner with autism develop the skills they need in all the critical areas of adult life, including self-control, planning, and problem-solving, effective communication, performing life skill tasks for independent living, acquiring and maintaining employment or other meaningful activities, developing and maintaining social skills and relationships, accessing transportation and public services, and being safe. Skills Living includes a comprehensive assessment, a data collection mobile app, behavior intervention plan builder, and automatic progress reporting. It also provides a complete curriculum addressing 16 key areas spanning the entire range of functioning adulthood. Skills Living is easy to use and can be implemented by schools, parents, and autism service providers. Call or click today for your free demo and see how Skills Living can help your learner with autism avoid the cliff and instead reach their fullest potential. Skills Living. Wish, learn, become.
And we're back, and we have some in the news stories.
Yes.
The first one's a very nice story.
Yes.
About a Universal Orlando employee who helped calm a child with autism by actually getting down on the floor with him.
Yeah.
Because they have training in this.
Yes. And I loved this partially because my husband is a Universal employee. I must disclose that. And I love Universal, and I love some of the programs that they have, and the way they treat their employees and the way they reinforce their employees. I don't know how much I can talk about, but if somebody writes into an employee or about an employee, they will share it with the employee, and there's recognition. And I will say that a couple of years ago, there was a letter that came in for my husband that they shared with him. They didn't give anybody permission, so I've not shared it here, but I can generically speak about the fact that it was a mom, an autism mom, who said, I don't know where you got that particular, my husband's a wand keeper at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. He's one of the actors. He's the one in the commercial right now. And anyway, they said, I don't know where you got that wand keeper, but people come in to do the wand show. It's an experience, right? You come in and you're in the wand shop. You're like in the scene from Harry Potter when he picks out the wand, and somebody gets picked from the audience to come forward and have the experience in a very, intimate way with everybody watching. It's like magical is what it is. And so this woman described the fact that she came in with her 3 children, and she said, my daughter is on the spectrum, and, whenever we go someplace, she never gets picked for anything. And she was like, this wand keeper picked my child on the spectrum, and asked her to come forward. And she said, I was, a nervous wreck. Like, I knew she's really into Harry Potter and this would be great, but, what's going to happen? And she said, this wand keeper was amazing, and that he made her feel like she was special and magical and that she was sleeping with her wand, right?
Oh,
and like, we cried buckets when my husband got this letter, and he was just so pleased. And everybody, they read the letter out loud and said, this is amazing. And it was just like super awesome. And that kind of thing happens at Universal all the time. All the time. Like, I want people to know this story has made it. It's viral. Everybody's talking about this story
viral on Facebook.
Yes. About
he was getting ready to go on the Spider-Man ride, and it closed down before he could get on.
And he laid down, and it was, for him, it was like the end of the world.
Right.
And everybody was like, oh no, what's happening? And the employee just laid right down on the floor with him and said, it feels bad when you can't get on the ride, and I'm right here with you, and let's practice breathing together. And was just awesome because they had been trained to do that, and because Universal employees are really, I think some of the best people in the world dealing with autism right now. And I just want people to know that this is awesome. This story is awesome, but it happens all the time at Universal. That Universal is particularly awesome about this, and I just want to say big kudos to the family for allowing it to play out. There were people who were like, because you know how people are, when somebody falls to the ground and is screaming, everybody's like, do
Freaking
something,
out, right.
do something, because something's going to happen, and there's people walking by. And that this employee really kept a lid on it and said, walk by us, and encouraged the family to do that. And this mom said that it was so amazing that they are going to come back to Universal, and that they're going to do the Spider-Man ride another time. I just think it's super awesome, the whole thing, from start to finish.
Story.
And it feels very close to home for me because of our lives. So then the other big fabulous story, did you watch the Tonys
Yes,
on
I
Sunday?
did.
Did you not have your face crack and almost fall off because you were smiling so hard?
Yeah.
And I think this has been viral too, but we have to discuss this, that Ali Stroker, won the Tony and accepted the Tony, and had this beautiful moment where from her wheelchair held that Tony up and said, this is for every child
with a disability
that's watching and wants to know that you want to be represented in this, and you are. And I loved too, I'm going to get so emotional, but there was, when she said, I just want to say to my family, we did it. We've been watching Ali for years, because years ago, when Glee was at its height, right? They had a show that played on another network that was all about a group of high school kids who came to this summer camp to work with the folks from Glee and professionals for an opportunity at the end. It was sort of like a game show, but a reality show, that somebody at the end would get the opportunity for a guest star spot on Glee. So these are the real life kids living Glee, and Allie was one of those kids on that show. And she was in that wheelchair, and she was like, I'm going to do everything that these other kids do. She was just grit city, right? And it got to the end of the show, and she grew so much as a performer throughout the show, but it got to the end of the show and she didn't win. And a lot of us were like, no, Ellie didn't win. But she made such an impression on the audience that they gave her a small role on Glee the next season. And everybody who had watched that other show was like, yay, Allie's on the show. And Glee was all about inclusion from the beginning, and it had a character that was in a wheelchair that was played by an actor who didn't need to be in a wheelchair, right? So Allie was breaking down barriers with Glee, and actually, just doing incredible work. And she's a brilliant actress and a great singer, and does brilliant choreography in that wheelchair.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. So it was just so fun to hear that she'd been cast as Ado Annie on Broadway in Oklahoma, in this new, very modern version of Oklahoma that I was like, okay. But she's wonderful. And it's a very gritty version of Oklahoma. Very interesting.
Have you seen it?
I have not seen the whole show, but I read the reviews for it, and I've seen lots of clips. They have clips all over the place on Facebook and on YouTube from the show. And it's very modern feel to it. But it's all about the grit that it takes to be. They didn't change a word of the script, but it's a very different way of telling the story than you've ever seen. And but anyway, to see her win that Tony, just oh my gosh, my husband and I were so excited and weeping and applauding.
It's wonderful.
And of course, there are a lot of our friends that here in LA that are represented by KMR. That's sort of the KMR has two divisions. They're talent agents, and they have one division that's just it's boutique actors, but they specialize in having actors of different abilities. And so a lot of our friends of the show are represented by KMR, and it was thrilling because she's one of their clients.
Oh, okay.
So everybody felt like they knew her, and everybody was celebrating, and it was just a really wonderful
Yeah,
day.
it was wonderful.
Okay, so and then our last story, there's
Interesting story.
Right?
Yeah.
in the Washington Post. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's all about mothers who have children with autism that discovered that they themselves had autism.
Yes. And we've seen that on the show, right? We've had, we just had Anne-Laure Davin on the show the other day
Right.
talking about her book and the fact that she was a mom and had
Right.
2 kids and kept feeling like, what is it I'm missing? What is it that I'm missing? And, but we've had tons of other moms who've been on the show who got their diagnosis around the same time as their
Their
kiddos.
children, because they realized that
Yeah.
they had this in common and probably were never diagnosed.
Yeah.
And some of them went on to actually be diagnosed at the age that they had their children.
Right. Like sometimes concurrently with their child getting the diagnosis or right afterwards. I think it's a really common thing when your child is being diagnosed and like I remember when somebody was looking at my child and saying, yeah, you want to get him looked at for autism. And I was saying, what exactly, like I've heard of autism, I've seen autism, but what exactly is it? Like define it so that I can see a picture of it. And they were saying, well, you know, sometimes, and there's lots of different ways that autism presents itself, but they were saying, you know, sometimes when there's so much sensory input that they can't process all of it, that their ability to process it is somewhat hampered, they will shut down and become internal. And they'll not want to respond to anything. And I went, oh, I'm like that.
Right.
Do I have autism?
So you actually wondered whether you had
Yeah,
on the spectrum.
And I think that that's a pretty common thing amongst a lot of parents that at some point we go, but wait a second, or the flip, or sometimes both of it, that I hear parents all the time going, well, now I wonder if my husband's on the spectrum. Because my husband does this thing that they're talking about in clinic, and I'm like, but my husband does that. And I think it's important to say that, you know, we all have some attributes of being on the spectrum. Like it's a big menu. You you have some from column A, some from column B. Even in the newer diagnosis, it's like that. So don't be afraid to ask. Right? I didn't feel ashamed to ask that. And years ago, I did finally work up the gumption to say to Dr. Grampish, I was like, sometimes I think maybe I have autism. And she said to me, Shannon, you don't have autism. You're way too social, Shannon. Like you're not going to, because the thing about it is that you have to have enough of it that the little asterisk at the bottom of all the things that describe autism say that you have to have it to such a degree that it functions as a disability in your life. It has to stop you from normal functioning. So you may not be able to make great eye contact, but if it's not preventing you from having a relationship, having a job, having friends, driving a car, then it's not disabling you. It's just part of you. So I think it's a really important distinction to make so that everybody doesn't go, oh no, maybe I also have autism. But some people do.
And it's wonderful that they can finally get an answer to what the issues were for them growing up all through life.
Yes. I think of one of our guests, a dad who didn't discover that he had autism until he was in his 30s. And you and I were talking to him and said, he's a pastor, you know who I'm talking about? And he said, I said, well, did it actually do anything for you to get the diagnosis? And he said, you know, I felt like I got to meet myself for the first time. What an amazing thing. Like, doesn't that just give you goosebumps? I got to meet myself for the first time. And we've heard from so many people who get a late diagnosis that they go, oh, well, it all makes sense now. I finally
get it now.
It makes sense. And sometimes for the spouses, they go, oh, is that why that this never works this way? Because I keep expecting that at some point this will happen, and that's not, because that's not who they are. Oh. And then everybody changes their expectations a little bit. And then when you know Like if you don't know what it is that you're missing constantly, especially with social cues, if you don't know what that is and then somebody explains it to you, then suddenly now it's a skill you have.
Right.
And that's what a lot of adults on the spectrum find. But imagine, Nancy, realizing that it affects the way you mother and that your child now is on the spectrum and you're going to get things that other people don't get, that you go, I know why he's doing that.
Right.
Because I did
it myself, yeah.
So it's a very unique thing. In fact, one of the friends of the show who sometimes watches is, in fact, going to be giving a talk on this to the UN in the next week about being a mom on the spectrum and what the challenges are that you face. So maybe we can get her to come on the show to talk about that. But you can read this article. It's by Isabella Diaz. In the Washington Post. It just was out the other day. Yesterday. I had to do the math. Okay, 2 days ago. I can't do the math.
June 11th.
Yes. So that's just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
In any case, we need to take a break because we've got a fabulous guest here. She's an amazing autism advocate and mom, and she's co-author of this new book, Remembering Monty. So Kimberly Kaplan's going to be here with us and in just a minute, so stick with us. Thanks.
Welcome back. For the month of June, I figured we'd do some cool things that are kind of like summer camp activities. So the activity we're doing this month is making a shoebox guitar. The materials you'll be needing are an old shoebox, a paper towel roll, a pencil, a stencil, rubber bands, a crayon, and an X-Acto blade, which only the adults will be using. So first things first, I have a shoebox and I painted it just so it's a little more interesting. This is an opportunity for your kids to decorate however they choose. They can keep it simple or do some stripes with paint, or you can always use, stickers or tape instead of paint to decorate it. All right, now that I have this, I'm gonna take my stencil, place it on top of the shoebox, and I'm gonna draw a circle somewhere in the center, okay? So now that I have that, I'm gonna take my X-Acto blade, which is why this is for the adults, and cut out the circle. Next, we're going to cut out a smaller circle at the top of our shoebox guitar. The reason we're going to do this is so that we have a place to insert our paper towel roll, aka the stem of the guitar. And I'm going to grab my paper towel roll and I'm going to trace the outside of this so I can cut a hole on the top of this too to stick this in so it just looks a lot more realistic. It won't be usable, but it'll look pretty cool. Now that it's been traced, now I'm going to cut it out with the X-Acto blade. And again, this is something that only the adults should be doing. Now that I have both of the holes cut in this, I'm going to take my guitar strings and place them on. As you can see, it's missing one thing. It's stem, so now I'm going to put this in the hole we just cut out. Alright, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my crayon and put this in. And then after that, your guitar is totally done and you're ready to rock out with your kids. And if you're really cool, you'll make another one so you and your child can play together while doing socio-dramatic play, or work on imitation skills where you play a pattern on here and then they try to repeat it. I hope you and your child had lots of fun making this. And until next time, rock on.
Can you see me flying by your side?
Parent-to-parent token economies are a great way to get to good behavior with your child. So first of all, let's talk about what is a token economy. It's just a visual representation of reinforcement or a reward that's going to come later on for behavior that you've done now. So I've got a couple examples here of token economies that I want to show you. But one of the most important things to remember with a token economy is that it's essential that whatever the child is working for be meaningful to them. So here, this is a two-part token economy. I've got a list of things for the child to pick from, to pick what they want to work for. So the child would pick off the one they want, put it on their other token economy, and you can see it says, I'm working for a play date. What a great thing to work for. And as this child progresses through their day at school, every time they do a task and they do a good job, they're going to get a token to put on this token economy. And we've got a rule in place for them that says maybe you have to get 3 tokens in order to get that reward, which today is a play date. And as the child gets better, we're going to make it harder and harder. Maybe next week it's going to be 4 tokens to get the play date. This is another token economy here. This is a task completion token economy, so every time the child completes a task that there's a picture of, they can peel off a token and put it on to demonstrate that they have completed that task. Again, it's essential that they get a really wonderful, meaningful reward for having gotten these tokens. Using a token economy can be much simpler than this too, because you can download them to put a free app on any one of your devices. Right here on my phone, I've got a free app, Easy Kid Tokens, and when my child does a task and completes it, and he can specify what the stickers are. In this case, it is a ladybug, and when he gets 3 of them, then he's going to get his reward. This is a really simple way to take something with you when you're going on an outing and make sure that your child is staying on task and getting rewarded for the things that they do. It leads to good behavior. One of the most frightening things there is when your child wanders away or elopes. Welcome back.
Oh, we're back.
Yes, we are back.
Yeah. And we have our next guest, Kimberly Kaplan, who, as we said, has authored this fabulous book, Remembering Monty.
Yes.
And Kimberly, you're also an autism mom, we should say.
Yep.
So we want to support you in this book.
And then we will also talk about, she's got some autism books,
Right.
autism-related books that
Autism-related,
we'll talk about. But is this your 3rd time on the show?
Second time.
I
Second
thought it
time.
was the 3rd time. Well, we
Yes.
should have had you on 3 times by now. What were we thinking?
But thank you for having me on the first time and the second time.
Well, we're thrilled that you're
great.
here, and I want to start by talking about this, and then we're going to backtrack and talk about all things autism mom.
Right.
But I was saying to Nancy before that, it's summer and it's time to have something that's a good read and a page turner.
Right.
And if you're at all interested in that sort of golden era of television and want to hear all the behind the scenes stories, like I love Kathy Griffin, and she always says, so this is what happened behind the scenes.
Right.
This is that book for that era.
Yeah.
You feel like you're sitting there. I feel like you really should have an audio version of the book, and I was picturing Bobby Costanza, the actor, this kind of New York kind of. So then I said to Monty this, and then Monty said this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it would be a great thing to take on a car trip, because there are great Hollywood stories in here. So love that. But I also was just saying to you that every grade, at some point, kids have to do a book report on a biography or an autobiography, and then they have to dress as the character and stand and be that person. And this is going to be the hot book this year for
It's
that.
so funny because he was never the one in the costumes.
Right.
It was always the contestants in the costumes.
Right. I loved Let's Make a Deal. Did you
I
love
loved
that
it.
show?
Grew up on it.
How did you come to write this book?
Okay, well, the story is Ken Rodcup is really the inspiration behind the book. He knew Monty Hall.
Okay.
Monty Hall gave Ken Rodcup his first industry writing job back in the early 60s.
And that story's in here.
Yeah,
It's a good story.
called Your First Impression. And they became friends and knew each other. They played a lot of tennis. That's how they became friends. So over the decades. Ken Rodcup was my screenwriting mentor. I met him in 1991. So I knew him forever, like a father figure, actually. He contacted me April of last year. And he said, I'm trying to put this biography out on my friend who had passed away about 10 months before.
Monty Hall.
Yeah, Monty Hall had, in 2017. And Ken said, I'm struggling with my other writer. She's just not getting the work done, the research done, things like that, and I want to get this out. So we sat down and we talked about it, and he said, well, she knows that I'm trying to replace her, and she's just got too many personal things going on. She said, would you be interested in doing it? And I think I said, when I was here last summer, I said, I'm working on this project.
I remember that.
To you, and I wasn't sure at the time if I could say what it was, because it wasn't done yet.
Right.
But I was thrilled. I was writing with my mentor, I was writing with Ken, and we spent the whole summer getting it in. And we got it in just after Labor Day, and it was, you know, just a really great experience for me. I did all the pictures. I talked to Carol Merrill for like hours.
Like,
Sweetest
I
woman.
talk about Carol Merrill like every third show because I do this at some point, and I say it's the jargon, and I go, "There's my Carol Merrill move."
She's
That's
such a sweet person.
She's a legend.
Oh my gosh, she's such a. And I talked to Monty Hall's brother, who's
Wow.
still alive, like 94 or something like that.
I remember that we have young people watching the show. So for those of you who don't know who Carol Merrill is,
Or Monty Hall.
well, Carol Merrill was always the model on the game shows,
Yeah.
especially on The Price is Right, that they would say, Carol Merrill will now show you. And she would do that hand movement.
Oh, right,
and,
right.
where you know, she'd be showing you the box of whatever and going like this. That's the Carol Merrill move. Okay, anyway,
For Let's Make a Deal. Yeah.
and for Let's Make a Deal too, but she also did it for The Price is
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And but one thing that was notable is Monty Hall would say her name and Jay Stewart's name, and that was just not done back then.
Right.
With the host of the show saying, and now Carol Merrill will, you know.
Yes.
So she credits him for getting her name out there and saying
love
her
that.
name every single show, and Jay Stewart. Well, the sad part to this book is that a month and a half after we got the book in, Ken Rothkopf went into the hospital and he passed away about a week and a half after that.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes, so so here I was with this fabulous experience, and once February this year came around and our book was coming out, I was kind of like, well, I'm on my own now to try to figure out how to get the book out and how to, you know, promote it and all that. So. Yeah, I try to go around and dedicate it to Ken, because this was Ken I never met Monty. I didn't have the privilege. So this was Ken's project and Ken's mission. And so the book came out at the end of April.
And tell us where we can get it on.
You can get it
Amazon,
on
of course.
Bear Manor Media or Amazon.
Okay.
So Bear Manor is the publisher
Okay.
of the book. And I mean, the interesting thing is because this was Ken's contract. This was Ken. He was the, you know,
Right.
the author under contract.
Right.
Right.
So I had to figure out how to do the publisher was great with me. He understood the whole situation, but I had to do the final edits. I had to get the pictures in. I had to kind of take over the role for Ken, having no idea really what I was doing.
Oh, but you've done a lovely job.
Oh,
and he
thank
would
you.
be so
Yeah,
happy. And what a great gift to give your mentor posthumously to make sure that his book and his story gets told.
I just wanted to do it with him. It was just so cool last summer to work with him and do all this with him. And then it just happened very fast that he passed away.
Well, we encourage everybody to get the book because it's a great read.
Thank you.
And,
and
a fun
support
read.
your local autism mom author, right?
you.
And enjoy yourself.
Right.
It's
Enjoy
really
yourself.
lovely.
Thanks.
And
Yeah,
he
you've got
calls
some
you the bulldog in this.
Yeah,
Is that not
so,
necessarily what you
know, I'm editing the book, I'm doing the final edit.
Right.
I didn't know what he called me. And so I have friends back east phoning me saying, why are you the bulldog? What's going on? And I tell my friends back east the story, and they're like, I can't change what he called me because the man passed away.
Right. Well, you could have.
How could I can't?
But he said you were unrelenting.
Well, and just in finding the people to contribute to the book, I found Henry Koval, who was Monty Hall's assistant on the book. So you get little nuggets like Henry Koval would take Monty's handkerchiefs at the end, because Monty was always being kissed. And he would go off camera and he would wipe the lipstick off. So Hank Koval would take it and shove it in his pocket. Well, one time he forgot to take them out. And he went home, and his wife would empty his pocket. He emptied his pockets this one time and said, okay, what's this? You know?
Right.
And he would have to explain this, okay, that's Monty's. It's not mine, that's Monty's.
Right. All these
You know, all
handkerchiefs
these,
with lipstick on it.
yeah, exactly. So these little nuggets kind of came out from, and then Monty's brother and contacting Monty's 3 children who were lovely. They contributed to the book. Richard Hall sat down with Ken Rothkopf and just spent several hours talking with him, and it was really great how everybody supported it. But I just didn't have the heart to change the acknowledgement.
Yeah, no.
I just didn't.
Well, and I think it's meant complimentary
It's
to
absolutely,
you. That you are unmovable in terms of that you were he asked you to get the stuff and you were going to do whatever it took to get it. So I think that's a compliment.
That's why I'm calming some of my friends though. Stop being offended. It's fine.
Yeah, I don't think it was it was meant as anything other than a compliment.
I just couldn't change.
But anyway, so Amazon.com, get the book, and and get it now. It's available now. Wonderful. But so while you're here,
Let's talk about some of your other books and that have to do with autism and being an autism mom.
Yeah, so we were just discussing this one. This was the first book, self-published book, but when we were 4 or 5 years along in the, getting assistance for my son, I just wanted to pay it forward. I was volunteering then. I was out in the autism community. I knew how to talk about it by then, and we had made tons of mistakes. So I said, well, let me just get that out there about what to do, what were the fortunate things and what were the mistakes.
Yeah. When was your son diagnosed? And
he was diagnosed in 2003, and he was about 15 months old.
Wow.
And back then you didn't get diagnosed that early. It was very lucky. We got very lucky, and then he was officially diagnosed at age 3 because it was a preliminary diagnosis. But we got all the services,
right?
So that was the good luck thing.
Okay.
So this was about the time he was 5 or 6, 7, somewhere in there.
Right.
When I decided to write the book and just put in the mistakes that we made and all the good stuff.
And were you already writing a blog then? Or?
No, the blog came later.
Okay.
And that's eventually this was just a collection of about my first 100. I was just telling you guys that I just posted my 300th blog.
That's amazing.
So this is around the first 100 or so.
Okay.
And this was drawn by a young lady on the autism spectrum. The cover was.
And the other cover was drawn by your son.
This was drawn by my son. This was
So
during
that book
his
is called A Parent's Guide
to Early Autism Intervention. Yeah. This was his Titanic phase, as I was sharing with Shannon.
That he has phases that he goes through.
Yes.
Of things that he wants to do deep research on.
Yes.
And know more about them. And see, I think that's awesome. What a great thing to want to perseverate on is doing research. And really, when you think about it, it's exactly what you did on this book. Is that you were unrelenting in doing the research.
Right.
So what a great thing.
Yeah.
And where can we get those 2 books?
These are on smashwords.com or amazon.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think we told a little bit about this the last time you were here, but so here's the funny, is that when my son was being diagnosed, we got a diagnosis at about 2.5, and our sons are almost exactly the same age. So, we call all our friends and family, and I call my husband's brother and my sister-in-law, and we tell them she wasn't quite, I guess they were married by then when he was diagnosed. No, they weren't.
No,
they weren't.
no,
They weren't
we
married
officially
yet.
met at
They
the
were,
wedding.
Yeah, they were dating then, and we called Jerry though, and we said, Jem's on the spectrum, and the first thing out of his mouth, he goes, "Oh, I have friends you have to meet," and he was talking about you and your husband, and I immediately was like, "No, we don't. We don't have to meet anybody. Like, what are you talking?"
Right.
And he's like, "No, they have a child the same age, and they just got a diagnosis too," and I was like, "Oh yeah, we really don't need to meet them then. Like, what good is that going to do to me? Like, we can sit and commiserate together. Like, I really was like, what?
You were too new.
I didn't have any time.
Yeah.
And there's something about when it's somebody in your family saying, "Oh, you should do this," and they don't have autism. You're like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're like, what?
Yeah.
And I always say that to people. I just said that to somebody on the phone the other day, that she was saying, "Oh, I found Autism Live, and I wish I could get my daughter to watch because my grandson just got diagnosed." And I said, "Oh, that's the kiss of death. If you tell her about it instead of her finding it herself, she'll never watch it. Like, don't even leave the card laying around and don't bring it up or whatever, because she'll never. Because I don't know what it is about us that we're like." When somebody who doesn't know, we're like, "You don't know what I've already done." So I was like, "Yeah, Jerry, sure, whatever, whenever, we'll meet them whenever." And then it was like a year later, we met you at the wedding, and we were like, "Nice to meet you, great, whatever."
Yeah.
But I think I probably spoke to you less than I would have as a human being.
Right.
If he hadn't already said this. So I don't know what my takeaway on this is. But it took us years.
It was volunteering. It was meeting each other out at events.
Right. Every time we would go someplace, we would
run into each other.
And then we'd talk, and we'd be like, "Oh, yeah, I know you from whatever." And now I feel like you're a friend, and I'm like, what an idiot am I that all those years, like, we could have been. And when you think think about it, how funny it is that Jerry probably thinks that every autism mother writes books or hosts shows or whatever, because and does a movie with Ed Asner.
Yeah.
You wrote a movie.
Yeah, I did.
Tell us about that.
That was just something, Tracy Wren and I are friends, and actually we met at Ken Rodkopp's writing class. So since the 90s, we knew each other. And every time, similar to you, eventually we looked at each other and said, we got to do something together. We got to do something together. And you know, and you never do anything together.
Right.
And then finally, she had a friend named Stephen Elba. And Stephen was Ed Asner's longtime assistant. And they were talking one day, and Stephen said, you know, Ed has a son and a grandson on the autism spectrum. Why don't you write something and we'll try to slip it to Ed and see if he likes it. Great idea. So Tracy and I went, you know, huddled together and said, well, what can we write? What can we write? And I came up with a short film, and we got it to Ed, and Ed said, all right, I'll do this.
Oh, great.
And so the actual film itself came together in about 3 weeks, because we had one opportunity, and we had to do it, or we were going to lose Ed. Basically.
And you don't want to lose that.
Exactly.
Centers on Ed.
So it centers on a grandfather and grandson relationship, and how the grandfather doesn't quite understand the grandson, and how can they get to understand each other. In
Short film.
14 minutes, I think.
Right.
And people can watch that where?
You can find that's actually still on the Autism Speaks blog, but it's also on my blog, KimberlyKaplan.com.
Well, we haven't talked about your websites. Where can they go to find your blogs and to find all that?
So KimberlyKaplan.com, or ModernMom.com also has all the written blogs, but the film is on KimberlyKaplan.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're a very diverse person who has not sat shrinkingly and done nothing. I mean, you've done all these other things. And, you know, and we have done a fair amount of shows here, too. So I think Jerry just, honestly, if we polled him and said, what do autism moms do? And he said, oh, they kick into high gear into very public things.
But, you know, the interesting thing is, I think around the time Jerry found out, Jason was 2.5, but before that, we didn't tell anybody.
Right.
We spent the first 2 years, and maybe 3 people knew.
Yeah.
And that was it. Because we wanted to learn. We wanted to understand what we were talking about. We wanted to take care of our son, and we didn't really tell our families, because we didn't want that family, you understand, the family pressure of, oh, boys just talk late and all of that. We just wanted him.
Yeah.
So around that time, we were just probably telling everyone.
Oh, he said.
Yeah.
Oh, they've just been diagnosed too. This is weird.
Just been diagnosed, but Jason had been diagnosed 2 years earlier.
Right, and I didn't know that
early.
part
Exactly.
of it. So if I'd known that, I might have been like, oh, maybe she knows things I don't know.
exactly.
But I was like, so she just got diagnosed too?
What good is that to you?
Yeah, we're going to sit around and look for our butts with a flashlight together?
Right.
Like, what? How useful is that going to be?
But in hindsight, I should have told some people in my family earlier. In hindsight.
Okay.
You're scared. You're scared, and you don't know how to talk about it. You don't know really what you're talking about.
No, you don't.
But I got to be honest with you. The first thing I did, I mean, like I walked out of the appointment, went out to the parking garage, and pulled out my cell phone and started calling friends and family. And it was such a bad idea.
I never would. Yeah.
It was such a bad idea, because the things that they said in that moment made me. Like, well, first of all, I had been saying for 6 months that I thought something was wrong, and they all said, no, not at all. So when I called, I didn't tell them we were waiting for the diagnosis and going. I didn't tell anybody that. But when we got the diagnosis, I turned to my husband and said, we better circle the wagons. And I started calling everybody, and almost everybody said, oh, yeah, we kind of thought so.
Yeah. And you're like, why didn't you say something?
And they all said, well, right?
They happened to me.
And they all said, well, I didn't want to be the one to, you seem so happy, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so then I didn't trust any of them. In fact, I think that Jerry and Jackie were one of the only people who didn't say that, and we continued speaking to them. There were other people that were put on notice.
You just had to
that they were on.
back off.
I had a very similar experience where
I think a lot of people do.
Oh, we knew something was wrong, but we didn't want to say
And
anything.
you just want to throw a book at their head. Like Temple Grandin with the girls, right? And like, thanks a bunch. This is only my life and my kids' life. Thank you for keeping your quiet.
But so with us, ours started so young.
Yes.
So by the time he's 2.5, we know how to talk about it. We know how to say that, you know. And so we didn't really quite have people come to us and say, you know, because we can come at them and say autism.
Right.
You know.
You had your ducks in a row. But you know that if you had gone at 15 months and told people, people would have been like, no, he's fine.
There was something about it. We had my husband's best friend who was a pediatrician, and then we had the modernmom.com person, one of them the woman who runs the website, her husband plays softball at the time, played softball with Michael, my husband. And she used to be an autism facilitator.
Okay.
So she was our first phone call when we found out. And so we had this person who could give us all accurate
amazing.
information.
How did you find out? Through your pediatrician?
No.
That's a whole other story.
Her husband was at my son's first birthday party. So she wasn't able to come. I forget why not, the person for modernmom.com. And he was watching Jason, our son, who's first birthday, 12 months old.
Right.
And our son was watching a ceiling fan. He was going like this.
Right.
And her husband just made a comment. He didn't even really, and later on we found out he didn't really know what he was talking about. But he
Right.
just said, if my wife saw your son doing this, she might think he has autism.
Oh.
Because she knew. She was in the autism world. She was a facilitator. And my husband later that night just Googled it. And because we weren't suspecting anything, but we had a really good kid in terms of he was quiet.
Right.
He can entertain himself by spinning things.
Right.
He could watch ceiling fans.
Yeah.
So Michael looked it up that night and said, oh man, and because we found a checklist. Oh, he doesn't look at us. He spins things. He stares at ceiling fans. And so we freaked ourselves out for that weekend. And then we just got to it. You know, we didn't deny it. We had Michael's friend, the pediatrician, who was just our friend. He wasn't our pediatrician.
Right.
That was probably the confusion. But we just got him diagnosed a couple weeks later, and we just started with the therapies.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
so how is he doing today?
Today he just finished being a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
Same age again. He's happy he has a summer off because usually he has a class or two in the summer. 16, no aid anymore. We weaned the aid off in middle school. A's and B's.
Great.
Yeah. He'll go to college. We're not sure quite where, if we'll do like a community college bridge or go straight to a 4-year school. We're not sure, but he wants to do that.
Right.
He doesn't quite know what he wants to do, but I didn't at that age, so
Right.
exactly.
And he's got things that he's passionate about, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Poland. I don't know where it came from, but
We didn't share
trying
that
to
with the
support
audience, that this is the Titanic was the passion at
Titanic,
one point, but currently
airplanes,
he's
cars,
very interested in Poland.
Yeah, there was Transformer phase. There was all these phases.
But you know what? That's really lovely, and it's lovely that the thing morphs to something else.
Always,
Because
yeah.
you know, there are people who pick
stepping
one
stone.
thing and stay in the one thing forever.
Yeah.
But I look at most of the people that I know that are wildly successful, and they are people who got really focused about something that they wanted to do and stayed focused
Temple
about
Grandin.
it. I mean, come on.
And
but
the
I mean,
husbandry.
but I'm not just talking about people with autism. I'm talking about the people that I know in life that are wildly successful,
Yeah.
and that when you talk to them or interview them, they're like, well, I made that decision that I would. I mean, you know, this Allie that just won the Tony, you know, when she was 16 years old, she was like, I'm going to that TV show camp for Glee because I'm going to be on Broadway.
Right.
She made up her mind, and to hear her say to her parents, look, we did it.
Yeah.
She's one to watch.
Yeah.
Nobody's
My
gonna
husband knew
stop
he
her.
wanted to be a lawyer
There you
around
go.
14 or 15.
Right.
So,
There you go.
wow, that's cool. You knew what you wanted to do.
Right? And my husband didn't know till later that he wanted to be an actor, but once he knew that he wanted to be an actor, that was it.
Right, yeah.
He wanted to be an actor and went through really hard times wanting to be an actor. But, you know, and his brother was going the right route of your husband.
Yeah.
He was like going to be a
Attorney.
lawyer.
Yeah.
And the two of them were like, you want to be a lawyer? You want to be an actor? What? But it all worked out because people get passionate about something. Anyway, we're way
All right,
past
so
out of time.
yes, we're out of time.
Order these books.
Order these books. This is a
Amazon.
tremendous fun read.
Look up Kimberly Kaplan
And then her autism books are
Yep.
and
great
go to your
insight.
website.
Supposed to flash him again?
Yeah, flash them
Yeah.
again. And say the website again.
KimberlyKaplan.com.
Okay.
www.kimberlykaplan.com.
And
Kaplan with a K, by the way.
Kimberly with a K, yeah, and Kaplan with a K. All right.
Thank you for
so much for
sharing.
being
You're
here.
welcome.
about the book
Thank you
and
for
about
having me again. This is
your
really,
autism journey.
really
Love-
great.
love having
I
you
really
here.
appreciate coming and
And just a programming note that next week the shows are going to be a little bit interesting because I'm going to be taking some time off.
Right.
There may be some live shows in there. I can't promise you what. And Traven's got some really amazing stuff planned for you. So tune back in on Monday to see the amazing stuff that's going to happen next week. And then we'll be back 2
The
weeks
following week. Yeah.
from now. So
right.
until then, give your kiddos a hug from me.
And yourselves a hug from me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.